At the outset, a privileged few had full rights, while many others were forced to find their own pathways to equality. Then a wave of women stood their ground. Faced with many dead ends, they drove relentlessly along narrow roads and around uncharted bends, until at long last one group's great accomplishment led them straight away to better but still uneven and unequal days. A second wave made progress, but faced many obstacles and came up short of its goal. It's been a man's world for a long time, but maybe someday we'll be able to say that equally so, it's a woman's world. A show which looks at any and all topics under the sun from a woman's point of view, featuring Ali Naithani. Here's Ali.
Welcome to the show, and I'd like to start by welcoming my co-host, Dr. Susan Strauss. Hi, Susan.
Hi, Ali. Thank you very much for having me. It's always fun to be here.
Oh, yes, well, it is, and we've got a great show today.
We do.
I'm going to introduce our first guest. Her name is Kathy Holmes. Hi, Kathy.
Hi, Ali and Susan. It's nice to be here.
Good to
Thank
have
you
you.
for being with us. Kathy is an author. She's an inspirational public speaker about invisible illness and caretaking. And we're looking forward to hearing your story.
Okay.
And let's start with that.
All right.
All right.
Tell us, you had an invisible illness and it caused you to become paralyzed. What in the world happened, Kathy?
Well, it's kind of an odd thing, as a lot of invisible illnesses are. Invisible illnesses is something that you have, a lot of people have pain, and nobody sees it, and they think that they're just fine, and yet they're not able to function as well because they have pain. A lot of autoimmune diseases are very much like that, where people don't notice them, and yet the individual suffers silently with them. And this is what happened with me, is that I got an autoimmune disease. It had been in remission for 5 years. I doctored for it, and the second time I got it was in 2008. The autoimmune disease I had was a vasculitis, and what it does, it's almost the opposite of AIDS, where your immune system attacks all the healthy cells, especially in the kidneys and the lungs, and then eventually you die because it kills the cells. So you have to tone down these, what they call T cells, and you do that with heavy doses of prednisone and chemotherapy. Now, everything went fine the first time I had this, and I got better. And as I said, I was in remission for 5 years. The second time, I kept getting weaker. I wasn't getting better. And for the 2 months before all this happened, I was in the hospital for 3 fractured vertebrae.
Ugh.
What happens with the prednisone, it can also exacerbate osteoporosis.
Okay.
And so my spine was getting weakened, only I wasn't fully aware how much. On November 1st, 2008, I stood in my bedroom doorway and I collapsed.
Oh, my.
And they hauled me off to the hospital. And with the different tests they took, the neurosurgeon came in and said that I had spinal cord damage,
Oh, my
and
gosh.
that I'd be paralyzed for the rest of my life.
Oh.
Then a second doctor came in and said, and then he left, and then the second doctor came in and said, we're going to discharge you.
Ah,
Now, not only could I not stand or get out of bed, I couldn't even roll over in bed because I was paralyzed from the waist down. And
excuse me just 1 minute. You mean they came in like the same day, one right after the other, and gave you sort
Right.
of conflicting messages? And oh my
My
word.
goodness.
And I said, well, how can I do this? I said, I can't even move. And she said, well, a social worker will come. Well, a social worker never came. And I panicked. And what happened is I insisted that they send me to the Mayo Clinic, which was really a fight to have to get them to do that. She says, we don't refer people. So anyway, I did get a referral to the Mayo Clinic. They checked everything out. And the doctors there felt that because of my other health issues that they couldn't operate, so that I was likely to be paralyzed for the rest of my life.
My goodness. So, Kathy, when you get told that, in that moment, what was that like for you?
It was such a shock. It was kind of like Alice who fell down the rabbit hole. It's like you're in a different world. Suddenly you're not the person you were before. And you think of all the things that you're not going to be able to do at first, that you get a little depressed with it.
So when you were lying there, and could you feel it yourself? Like, did you know, I can't move this part of my body anymore?
The doctor would come in and say, wiggle your toe, and I couldn't wiggle my toe. So it was, I knew that I couldn't feel anything, and I knew I couldn't roll over in bed either, so.
It must have been very scary.
It was very frightening, because I have to say that the first time I took the Metro Mobility bus, I got on the bus. Now, this is just an ordinary bus. I've done it all the time. I was so afraid because I was so vulnerable. Here I was in a wheelchair, and I was depending on somebody else, and I had lost control.
Right. It was a big loss of control, wasn't it?
Huge. So
Yeah.
you walked in here today. What happened?
Tell us.
I don't really know what happened, but I was in therapy at a rehab center for 5 months, and at that time when I left, I was hoyered out of bed into my chair and would go down to physical therapy. I could stand for 1 minute holding on to rails when I left.
Could you feel then your feet when you were standing?
No. And then I had a physical therapist come twice a week to my home, and by the time that was completed, I could stand for 3 minutes. It was so much work. I felt like I worked as hard as an Olympic star. I would sweat and sometimes get nauseated and everything because it was so much work to do that. And they have something called a sliding board where you slide from your wheelchair onto the bed. I never quite mastered that. I'm glad I didn't have to use it because that was hard. And I said to the therapist, I said, put me in the water at Courage Center. I said, and I will walk again. And I didn't really think I would. I really did not believe it. I believed the doctors that I would not walk, but I wanted to go in the pool. So I went in and I couldn't stand. I had poles. I told my husband I was pole dancing. And gradually, I got stronger because I felt comfortable in the water and started doing land therapy. I did land therapy in something that looked like a giant baby walker and walked around, and gradually I got stronger.
Was there a moment, Kathy, though, in the therapy where you realized there was hope, there was progression?
I think by being in the pool, as I got better in the pool, I realized there was that I was moving beyond what I thought I could do. And it was in small increments as to how I improved. So I wasn't saying, I'm going to get well, I'm going to walk. I said, I want to be able to get in my chair and just go to the bathroom.
Right.
And just the small things that I tackled.
How long was your recovery period?
In total?
Yes.
I'd say about 3 years.
Okay.
3 years. I started doing things. Well, what happened is that I became a first-time grandmother.
Aw.
And that was a joy. My daughter was 37, and I was very excited, and I wanted to be a proper grandmother. So I had inspiration, so I wanted to do things. And when she first was born, I'd put her in one of those slings and carry her on my chair, and we'd wheel around. So she knew Grandma in her chair when she was little. And as she grew and began to crawl and walk, is that I got better too, because I needed to do more things with her. I needed to stand and be able to change her diapers, so I stood and I worked real hard so that I could stand and do that. And actually, we learned to walk about the same time.
Oh, isn't that
that gives me
beautiful?
goosebumps. That's
Oh.
really neat.
It was so wonderful that, and now I have another granddaughter, and she doesn't even know that grandmother anymore. So,
Oh.
and I can actually even walk with her around.
It sounds like the acute stage of recovery was like 3 years, but you said you're still going to Courage Center. So do you still see yourself as recovering? Are you still feeling any improvement or not?
I think I'm kind of am where I'm going to be. The thing, we can always get stronger, especially as you age, is that we need to keep up, and that's why I want to keep it up. I don't want to lose what I
Sure,
have, because as we age, we tend to get weaker, and so I want to be able to be strong enough to continue my life.
One thing I'm curious about is, before you went in the hospital, you were walking, right? You were
Right.
until you fell.
Mhm.
So here you are, you're hospitalized, and now your life has changed completely.
Right.
So when you got home, your caregivers around you or the family, what was that like for them as caregivers to you? And how did you have to maybe accept some of those things? Or, because I'm sure you were, in many senses, so independent, where now things were changed. Can you speak to us about that?
It was difficult, and I would always try to find ways of doing things myself.
Okay.
I remember it's small things. I remember the first time that I figured out I live in a condominium and I have 3 doors to go to get outside. And I remember the first time I figured out how I could get out the doors without damaging them is to take my cane and hold the door open and then go through. And so each door I did that. And when I got out, it was like I'd been sprung because it was so wonderful. And I have a path that goes to a shopping area. And I remember the first time I took my power chair and wheeled along that path. I mean, I heard the birds. I saw a squirrel. I talked to the squirrel. I was just so excited because it was suddenly like things I hadn't ever done or ever seen before.
Right. Oh.
So you wrote a book then about your
Yes.
experience. What did you focus on in your book?
One of the things that I say when I go out speaking is that I never say, if I can do it, you can too. That's just simply not true. We're all different.
Okay.
But I encourage people to do the best they can with what they have. And that's what I did. Each step, like I said, I didn't think I'd ever do stairs, and I started working on that. And you just take a little bit at a time, and gradually you get to a point where you know you've gotten as good as you're going to get, but you keep trying. And when I go to Courage Center, that's what I see all the time. I see people who have the courage to keep going despite their disability.
You are an inspiration, Kathy.
Absolutely.
You really are.
What a story.
Yeah.
And I think it's important for people to keep going, to look ahead and to not look back and say, this happened to me, or blame,
Yeah.
or it's to move on and to keep doing what you can with what you have.
What have the doctors said? I mean, those that told you you'd never walk, and here you are walking. What has been their response?
The last thing I heard was, what do they know, by one of my doctors that I see now.
Good,
Oh.
for sure.
Yeah, I don't know what happened, but it certainly was a pleasant surprise. I never would have purchased a power chair, which are very expensive, if I'd have known I wasn't going to be in it that long.
Thank
Wow.
goodness you
Thank
aren't.
goodness.
Yeah,
Thank
yeah.
goodness that was an outcome.
And I just feel like everything I have is a blessing, because when you take something away and then you get it back
Yes.
again,
Yes.
it means even more to you.
Yeah.
I bet
I
it
bet it
does.
does.
Well, Kathy, our time has come to an end, but if somebody wanted more information about your book or about what you do, do you have a website?
I do.
Okay.
My website is www.istandwithcourage.com.
I love it.
Thank you for sharing your story with